Good day, everybody. This is John Scarborough, getting ready to do a little bit of brush hogging. Wanted to touch on a little subject I've had a few questions about in the past, and the subject is it better to brush hog in the spring, or is it better to brush hog in the summer? And I wanted to touch on that just a little bit today, because it's an honest, fair question, and honestly there are differences throughout. There's different returns you can get, and most of these differences are going to be found in someone that's practicing more organic methods or more regenerative style ranching. So if you're spraying your pastures or something like that, this is not going to matter as much. I think maybe it still may have something to do with that. So you're welcome to continue to watch. You may learn a little something here and there, but for the most part, anybody that is not spraying their pastures and spraying the weeds out, this video should be very helpful. So as always, guys, if y'all are liking what you're seeing, I would appreciate a thumbs up. I'd also appreciate I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel. We try to put out really good videos as often as we can. We do at least 3 days a week for full length videos, and then we like to do some YouTube shorts kind of scattered out, just with little helpful tips here and there, or you might just be keeping up with what's going on the farm. All right, back to the video. So basically what I like to do, I put out a video earlier this year about brush hogging a pasture that I'd brush hogged, and it was about maintaining weeds. And we had brush hogged that pasture, and it was about late spring, and that really worked out really well for maintaining the weed growth and helping the weeds to knock back. Now if I would have gone too early and knocked off for us it would have just been early spring grass, that cool season grass, then I wouldn't really have created the benefit. But if I would have gone too late, then I would have, by then the weeds would have gotten more mature. Okay, so that's one thing I have found is if you're really trying to go for weed suppression, if you go too late in the summer, there are reasons to do it in the summer, later in the summer, and I'll get to that in a minute. But if you go too late in the summer, some of your weeds get a lot more mature like this, not to mention you end up with a lot more seed heads in there. But the plant has gotten big enough that the roots have enough stored energy down in them, they'll actually explode right back. Now it will help, but it's not going to be, you're not going to get quite as much benefit to that. Okay, so that's kind of the best reason. So right there in the early spring, or well, late spring, I'm sorry, late spring, early summer, right about the point you start to see your weeds come on, you're basically revegetating your grasses, and you want to make sure you've got summer grass in there. That's another thing. If you don't have your summer grass up yet, you probably don't want to go in there and clip yet, or you're not going to get quite that benefit from it. But if you start to get your summer grasses coming on, and you can clip the top heads of that, and then you're just starting to get your summer weeds, and you clip those, and you make a big difference in your weeds for that whole year. Now I'm not saying you're going to wipe them out, but you make a big difference. So then what would the reasons be for brush hogging more in the later summer, or possibly even in the winter sometimes? Some people do brush hog in the winter. Well, a lot of times brush hogging in the winter time can be really good if you have some really big woody plants and you have a smaller tractor or smaller brush hog. You can get in there. Now you have to be careful about a fire hazard because stuff is so dry, but you can get in there and it's a little bit easier to brush hog some of that big thick woody stuff. You know, some of that stuff I'm talking like it's getting bigger. And it's easier on your tractor because you don't have as much vegetation or leaf on there, and sometimes it can be more comfortable for you even. It's not, you know, especially if you got an open station tractor like me, it's not as bad. Secondly, you can actually see down in there, so that's where I would brush hog more towards the winter time. But late summer, there's a good reason for that too. So like this pasture right here that we're in, this one right here, this is an excellent example of a good pasture to brush hog in late summer. We're probably about August 20th now. This pasture was very good, very few weeds. You know, we've got sheep in this pasture, and there's just hardly any weeds in this whole pasture. And it does, you know, performs very well. There's a huge amount of grass, and there was just no real reason to come in here and clip at all during the spring, because honestly, there was hardly any weeds. And so the weed explosion actually happened later in the summer. Now, I could have come probably about mid summer and come in here and knocked them out, but they were never all that bad, okay? So that's the one thing that's nice about sheep, is they will actually start to eat those seed heads off of there. So it's kind of a catch-22, because it's like, if you really wanted to knock this out completely, obviously the fastest way to do it is to spray it. But a lot of us prefer not to do that if we don't have to. So that's something we're steering away from. But if you got this spot right here where it's just like a little strip of weeds in here, the best thing to do is to go ahead and hit it in the summertime, the later summer. And we're not even taking them all the way out. We know that we're not taking them all the way out because they've already matured a pretty good bit. But what we are doing is we're opening up the canopy and allowing the grasses to revegetate, and we're getting closer to the end of the growing season. So then there's another good reason to brush hog in the late summer, and that's going to depend on your area, and that's stockpile, okay? Now, here in the South, as y'all know, it's a little bit more difficult to stockpile forage. I've got all kinds of video on stockpiling forage in the South. Y'all can go check a lot of that out. You'll learn a lot. There's a few things. It's kind of hard. It's very hard. There's definitely a few tips that would help out in there. But Bahia, by and large, Bahia grass does not make a good stockpile forage at all, unless you're talking about sheep. Sheep and goats will absolutely eat and thrive through the winter, from my experience, on stockpiled Bahia. They seem to do very well. Now, cows, they'll just about starve to death on it. You can get them, you can kind of bring them through the fall, the later fall. You can kind of get it, once that grass stops growing and it starts laying down, but it's not fully dead, they'll eat some of that, But once you get into, full-on wintertime, that Bahia is worthless. There's just no value to it. But in here, we're doing pretty good because we're going to have sheep in here. So I can actually revegetate this while I'm still trying to grow some stockpile. We're not quite to stockpile mode here in our part of the country, but we will be here pretty soon. We're going to be in stockpile mode. Well, I'm going to go on ahead and get this brush hog knocked down, clipped back a little bit. For the most part, I really wouldn't have to worry too much about it, because the sheep do a pretty good job of knocking them seed heads off anyway. But we want to knock out these weeds, kind of make this look a little bit better for the landowner. We don't really want to see these weeds take over too much anyway, because sheep and goats do not like this goat weed right here. That's what we call it here anyway. But they will eat the seed head, but they won't eat the whole plant all the way down. So we do want to go ahead and knock that out. So those are kind of some reasons that you might want to brush hog later in the summer. And of course, you're always going to be okay brush hogging in the summer. Like if you don't get to it in the spring, that's fine. You're going to be okay. Another good reason to brush hog in the summer is simply because your ground's drier and you're going to get less compaction of the soil. So if it's real wet in the spring, like we've had springs where it was just so wet, we knew we were going to be compacting that soil a lot, and that wasn't something we wanted to do. A lot of people think it's not that big of a deal, but if you look at the tires on this tractor and then the wheels on the back of this brush hog, we're covering a large amount of the soil with a lot of weight. A large amount of that soil. Look at how many wheels is on there. And you look at the tractor and you look at the wheels on that, that's a lot of ground that's getting covered by those wheels, and it's compacting. So that's another decent reason, pretty good reason in my opinion, to brush hog later in the summer if you need to. You might not get some of the same weed benefits, but if you got a wet spring, that's something to remember. And then for us, like we've talked about in the past, Bermuda grass, Bermuda grass, it makes pretty decent stockpile here in the South. It's still nothing like y'all can get up north, but it's still pretty decent Bermuda, pretty decent stockpile forage. So you can go in there and revegetate that. That's something I'm going to do a little bit later on this year. I've got a couple places that's got some Bermuda, and I will be going back in there and revegetating. And we're already, to this point, we're already kind of looking at the way we're grazing it and leaving a little bit more behind. But probably come next month, we're definitely going to be trying a little bit harder to leave more behind and just barely take the tips off, because that stuff we can really stockpile for a little while. And then another really, really good one is Dallas grass. You can stockpile Dallas grass. I've heard a lot about it. I haven't done it myself, but I've done a lot of research on it, and I've done a little bit of talking to some people in my area that actually do it. Now, I will say this, from what I understand, Dallas grass is good if you live in bottomlands, or if you have in lower areas, you know, spots that have more moisture. So that's one reason why I haven't invested in any yet. I may invest in some. It's pretty pricey. It's about the same as Bermuda, if I understand it. It's actually a little bit more, but it is pretty pricey, and I haven't invested in any because you need to do it in your lower areas. I may do it one day, put some in certain spots because of its stockpile ability. But anything that I'm trying to stockpile, I would probably consider brush hogging later in the summer, but just barely taking those tips off. So anyway, guys, I hope that answers y'all's question. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.